Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at importing in Python, and particularly advanced importing. And in Python you import modules, and yes, this is the Luna module. But the idea is that each thing is a small compartment and has a few things in that you'll need, and that's what makes up a module. So we've already met this, so you've probably seen import turtle, and from turtle import star, and that's where we're importing the turtle module, or in this case we're importing functions from the turtle module. Something that's important with modules is absolute versus relative imports. So if we illustrated from the maze, for the red person to get to the blue person they go up and left, and that's their relative position, but the absolute position is obviously going up and then left, then up and then left twice, or even the relative position from the blue to the red is right and down. And in Python importing you can use both. And so this is an absolute import where you say from the folder that the main code is running in, import this module. You can also use relative imports which say from the current folder I'm in, import the current module. Or we can say from the module above, so the folder above, import this module. But there is a limit, so you can't go all the way back. And so we're going to have a look at this by writing our own code. So if we start with something simple, we can just import math. And maybe we can print math.py. And so we can just run that. And you see it's printed the value of pi from math. But what if instead we wanted to import pi from math? So now we're looking at the math class and importing pi, and then we can just print pi. And that's a bit nice to work with. You can also import your own modules. So I've already written some code. So in this folder, you can see that we've got a class folder, a base, a file with some spaces in, as in the name, and then our main folder which we're working with. So if we have a look at this base, we can see that it will print imported base, and then it defines this class base, which will just say that the current class is initialized, and then it's running. So maybe we'll import base, and we can just print base. And it says there that we've got this module base. But this base also has a class, and that class is called base. It's a bit confusing, but the file names are all lowercase and the class names all begin with a capital. So if we run it again, we see now we've got this class, base.base. And in the same way with math, we imported pi differently. Instead we could say from base, import base. And then we could say that we have this main item, and we'll set that equal to a base currently, and then we can get the main item to run. So if you notice in this base file, it's got a run command which will print that it's running. So if we run it now, we can see the first thing it does is it imports base, then it initializes it, and then it's running. But you'll also see that we've got this folder, and so we could go into the folder and see what's there. So in this folder there's a subfolder, there's another base, and there's a file. And then maybe from the file in the folder, so folder.file, and we want to import the file class. And again we'll say main item is a file, and then maybe we want to do main item.run. And we can run that. And so it's imported base, it's imported file, and then the folder/file is initialized, and then it's running. So if we open that file, we see what it does is it imports base from base, and then it prints its imported file, But what's interesting is if we actually run this piece of code, file.py, so if we run folder/file, we can see that it's imported the alternative base. And that's because if we have a look at the base class in the folder, it says that it will print imported alternative base. And so what's happened is, so you can see when we've run it from this main file, we've been in this directory, so it's looked for base and found it here. However, when we've run it from file, we've been in this directory, so it's looked for base and found it there, so it's gone for that one. So as you can see, the paths are absolute, which means that they're relative to the file that you run as your main one. But let's say when we run it, we want to import the base, well then we could just put a dot here. And it says that currently it won't work, so if we run this again, you can see that it attempted a relative import with no known parent package. And what that means is it has to be imported from something else to use relative imports, and they'll begin with a dot. But if we run the main file, we see now it's using the alternative base. Another thing you can do with relative imports is you can import the thing above. So if we look in our subfolder, we can say that from the folder.subfolder import the subfile, and then we can print the subfile. We can print the subfile.file, and so we can see that it imports base, it imports the subfile, and then we've got this module in this folder, and then we've got this class. So then instead, from the folder, and then the subfolder, and then the subfile, we can import the file. And again, we can say that our main item is equal to a file, and we can get our main item to run. And there you can see it's imported base, it's imported the subfile, and then the subfolder and the subfile is initialized and then running. So if we actually open the subfile, which is in folder, and then subfolder, and then subfile, what we could do is we could change this to import the relative base, but there isn't a base in that folder, so that won't work. That will just crash our program, as we can demonstrate. So there's no module there, but instead we can use a second dot, and so now it'll import the alternative base. And if we use a third dot, then it goes all the way back up to the initial one, and now it's saying it attempted a relative import beyond the top level package, because if we change this back to base and run the main file, but this time maybe we'll have a look here. So it's got folder.subfolder.subfile. So first we have the subfile, and when it looks with a single dot, it looks in here and it says, is there anything in this subfolder called base? And there wasn't. When we used two dots, it went up again, so it said, is there anything in this folder called base? And there was, so it used that. But when we went up even further, there was no more module to import, so it just crashed because we'd gone beyond the top level package. And of course you don't have to import classes, you can also import functions and constants, for example math.py. The next thing I want to show you is how to import a class with spaces, because if you remember, we had this file with spaces, and if we just try import file with spaces, that's not going to work. You can see that there's invalid syntax. So instead what we can do is we can use import, and then we can just put the name, which is file with spaces, and run it, and you can see it's imported base. So if we look at that file with spaces, it imports base. So you can see we can import the file with spaces, save that as file with spaces, we could call it anything, and then we'll print that, have a look at setting the main item to the spaces object, which is in this file, and then we'll run it. And so you can see we import the base as it does. It then tells us it's a module, and then it says spaces initialized and spaces is running. Another cool thing you can do is we can have a look at importing this class folder. So if we actually look at the class folder, we can see that it's got a run.py and an init.py. And so if we import the class folder and then print class folder, so what we can do is we can run Python, run the main file, and you can see that we've got it's initialized from the class folder and it's a module. And we can see that it's got, for example, module run, but it says that the module doesn't have any attribute run, because this is, instead of being a file that contains, for example, a class or a function, it's a folder, so you can't really do that. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff you can do with importing files. You can use absolute imports, relative imports. You can import stuff with spaces, but it's best practice and advised not to. Instead, just rename your files. And another thing that's important is to be careful what you name your files. If we were to create a file called math and then try importing math like this, it would not work. But as you can see, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with imports to create your own classes and then save them in separate folders, instead of having to worry about having all your code in the same file, which again isn't that great practice. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. You've learned a lot about imports, and I'll see you again same time next week. Till then.